After won e4 and the opponent replied with e5, followed by knight f3 and knight c6, the 11th world champion, Robert James Fischer, typically preferred to play the Ruy Lopez in formal tournaments. However, on certain occasions, especially during simultaneous exhibitions, he would switch things up and go for the Italian game instead. If Black answered with bishop c5, Fischer liked to go for the Evans Gambit. But if instead of bishop c5, Black responded with knight f6, then he would continue with knight g5, immediately creating a double threat on f7. So, if his amateur opponents were not very familiar with how to neutralize this move, Fischer would crush them quickly, just like he did on countless occasions. The only reasonable way to defend against this direct threat is to push the pawn to d5, blocking the diagonal. After that, Fischer would capture. Now, the correct and best response for Black is to move the knight to a5, counterattacking the bishop, even at the cost of sacrificing a pawn. But most of his unsuspecting opponents had no idea about the theory behind this, and they would incorrectly recapture the pawn on d5 right away, which is known as a mistake. After this, it is well known that the knight sacrifice on f7 becomes possible, the famous fried liver attack. However, Fischer, whenever he reached this position, would refuse to follow that popular line. Instead, he would calmly play d4. So now the question arises, why would a strong player like Fischer, armed with deep theoretical knowledge, avoid entering this well-known sacrifice? Well, in this video, we are going to take a look at a few arguments and try to break it all down. According to ChessBase's collection of classical games, the move knight takes f7, the fried liver attack, has a win rate of 79.4%, while Fischer's preferred move d4, the lolly attack, has a win rate of 78.8%. That's only 0.6% less, an insignificant difference. Therefore, we can conclude that, objectively speaking, both moves are more or less equally strong. But now we need to talk about something very important, where Fischer's move clearly wins, the practical point of view. First of all, d4 is much less known than the famous knight takes f7, which means it's far less likely that your opponent, pretending to play innocent, has something prepared in advance. Second, it's also much less risky, since no piece has been sacrificed yet, and I emphasize the word yet. And third, and this is very important, if we want to truly understand Fischer's move, we first need to understand a bit of the theory behind the fried liver. So, if instead of playing d4, White immediately sacrifices with knight takes f7, the king captures, and then comes queen to f3 check, a double attack on both the king and the knight on d5. The knight cannot retreat to f6 because it is pinned. If Black wants to avoid letting White recover the piece and ending up with their king exposed in the center of the board, they are pretty much forced to play king e6 to support the knight. Then comes knight to c3, once again attacking the pinned knight, which forces Black to bring the other knight over to defend it. Retreating the knight to e7 is one option, although the main and strongest move is knight b4, defending d5 and possibly threatening a fork on c2. The best move for White is to castle. Now there is a threat to play a3, kick out the defending knight, and capture on d5. That's why Black usually replies with c6, reinforcing the defense. We must keep in mind that even though the Black king is exposed on e6, White is still down a piece and has to play very accurately to exploit the king's position. Otherwise, the king might escape, and Black would simply remain a piece up. We can actually confirm this. If we check the online database of fast-paced games on light chess, especially at the sub-2000 level, we quickly notice that White doesn't win as much. The stats are fairly balanced. This means that in many cases, the Black king has successfully escaped with an extra piece. So, if you ever find yourself in this position as White, it's important to know that the best approach is to keep sacrificing material and open up the center to expose the black king. That's why the move d4 is essential at this point. As for black, the best reply is queen f6, offering a queen trade, something white simply cannot allow. So the queen retreats to e2, and from there, theory continues into a sharp and complex battle. The evaluation here is that white is down a piece for just one pawn, and the black king is exposed. The engine gives an evaluation of plus 0.6 in white's favor. But now we're going to look at something important. Allow me to rewind just one move. If instead of playing the precise move queen f6, black plays bishop e7, that would be a mistake, because the engine's evaluation shifts completely and jumps to plus 2. Take a mental snapshot of this position, because it's going to be crucial to understanding Fischer's idea in just a moment. Now let's go back to the critical moment. Instead of sacrificing the knight right away, Fischer first opens up the center with d4. But that does not mean Fischer was never going to sacrifice the knight. He simply preferred to do it under favorable conditions, minimizing the risk. For example, if black plays bishop e7, preparing to castle and attacking the knight, that would be a mistake. White is not going to retreat the knight, nor allow black to castle. Instead, white continues with the typical sacrifice on f7. Once the knight is captured, the game follows the same forced line: queen f3, king e6, knight c3, knight b4, castle, c6. It's essentially as if, in the fried liver attack, black had played the inaccurate bishop e7 instead of the precise queen f6. We already saw earlier what that means. Remember, in this position, white has a massive advantage of plus 2. This is one of the reasons why white chooses this move order. Now let's return once again to the critical position. If instead of playing bishop e7, the line we just analyzed, black decides to capture on d4 with the knight, the short answer is that white plays c3, and suddenly black has problems to solve. If they move the attacked piece, the knight on d5 is also under double attack. But in fact, the main response after white plays d4 is neither of those. The main line is to capture on d4, but with the pawn. And here we might just find the final argument for why Fischer preferred to play d4 before sacrificing the knight. Morphy has 2 games from this exact position, and we know that Fischer was a devoted admirer of the player from New Orleans. He knew all of Morphy's games and even once said that Morphy was the greatest chess genius in history. So it's very likely that Fischer wanted to follow and replicate his ideas. After black captures on d4, white castles. The black king is now stuck in the center of the board, and the rook is about to strike from e1. So black plays bishop e7, attacking the knight and hoping to castle. But of course, Fischer is not going to allow that. And how does he continue? Of course, knight takes f7. Double exclamation marks for this move. After the king captures, the line continues in the usual way, with queen f3 delivering a double attack. In order to defend the knight on d5, the king must move to e6. But now, everything is different, because the e-file is already open and white can immediately follow up with rook to e1, check. If the king moves, the knight on d5 is captured, so the only option is to block the check with knight e5. Then Fischer continues with bishop f4. The pins keep coming. This knight is pinned, and the other one too. Black tries to defend with bishop f6, and here Fischer continues with one of the ideas he picked up from Morphy's games, knight c3. If the knight is captured, then white plays bishop takes e5, followed by bishop takes e5, rook takes e5, king takes e5, and finally rook e1, leading to mate in just a few moves. Exactly as it happened in one of Morphy's famous games. So black refuses to take the knight on c3 and instead defends their own knight on d5 with c6. But Fischer is hungry for sacrifices and brilliant play, and now he responds by sacrificing the rook on e5. The idea is that if black captures it, the other rook swings over to e1, and there is simply no way to defend the pinned bishop on e5. So the humble player with the black pieces once again avoids capturing anything, hoping to somehow survive, and retreats the king to f7. After that comes knight takes d5, with the idea that after recapturing, white plays bishop takes d5 with check, and the engine already shows mate in 12. So the black player sticks to their policy of not capturing anything, just to stay alive a few more moves, and plays bishop e6. But Fischer wants to end his opponent's agony, and once again, he sacrifices the rook, capturing the bishop. This time, the king does capture the rook, after which comes knight takes f6, a discovered check. If the king captures the knight, white replies with another discovered check, bishop c7, winning the queen, and the engine shows mate in 5 moves. But once again, the black king refuses to capture and instead moves to e7. Then comes rook e1, check. The king steps down to f8. And now comes the final blow, queen a3, check. The king has no legal squares left, so the only move is to block with the queen on e7. And with that, the agony ends. Queen takes e7, checkmate. But don't go just yet. There's still something very important. Let's return one last time to the critical position. After Fischer's move d4, even though the best reply for black is to develop the bishop to e6, once it's captured, white still holds an advantage of about plus 0.70, very similar to what you get in the fried liver attack, but without being down a piece. These are the possible reasons why Fischer prefers the lolly attack. Hope you enjoyed this analysis. See you in the next video.